Good evening. My name is Victor Peoples, and I currently serve as Director of Health and Service Initiatives for Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. Oftentimes, in this thing called life in the African American community, especially as it relates to African American males, there is an issue where we feel as if mental health does not apply to us. As an organization, we have come together to put together several mental health professionals that are members of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated to start the conversation centered around mental health. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Johnny Gaithers, LSW, who will be serving as the moderator, but more importantly, the chair of a new initiative that we are trying to push through Iota Phi Theta called Time. Brother Gaithers.
All right. Good evening, everyone. First off, I'd like to thank Victor for introducing me this evening. And as Victor stated, I will be tonight's moderator for this event. With Time is a new initiative that we are actually creating within the fraternity. And Time stands for Theta Men Improving Through Mental Empowerment. With this new initiative that we're trying to put together, this initiative will focus on three categories. And those categories are mental health, legal wellness, and financial wellness. So with tonight's event, this event is basically a precursor to what we have in store when it comes to our new initiative called Time. For everyone that is viewing tonight, either on Facebook, on YouTube, Twitter, and on our national website, for people that want to comment, you can only comment if you're viewing on Facebook and if you're viewing on YouTube. So for anyone that's viewing on Facebook and YouTube, share your comments, share your questions, anything that you want us to talk about tonight on this event and on this platform. So we're going to get things started. I want to introduce you to all the panelists that we're going to have tonight. With these panelists, again, these panelists are four mental health experts, and they are brothers of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. So the first panelist I would like to introduce is Charlie Simpson. Oh, we got, all right, first one is Charlie Simpson. It is what it is, but hell, we here. So, Charlie, introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Charlie Simpson. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and owner of the Arkansas Relationship Counseling Center, where we see approximately 1,100 couples a year. Through the Relationship Center, we help couples that are going through difficult times have an opportunity to, what I hear a lot of couples say, like each other again. Through that experience, I've been able to work with a lot of the men in our community, and also be able to be an advocate for a lot of the men in our community to just strengthen their perspectives on mental health, and also to break the stigma on how we see mental health in our community. Thank you all for inviting me to be a panelist. Hopefully what I'll say register to a lot of the audience members.
Real quick. So the first question I want to ask you is, what made you get into your profession?
Well, you know, a lot of the times in our field, you would hear counselors say they go through an experience that opens their eyes to be able to see the challenges that people face in life. And I've always loved working with couples, but it was a relationship that I went through that was hectic. And I always said to myself, it should not be this difficult. And through that experience, I began to read more about relationships. And then I found myself getting a degree in counseling and being able to work with couples. And that passion is just catapulted me into a sphere of just being able to help a lot of couples that are in a difficult situations.
All right. So the next person I want to introduce is Lamar Alexander.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lamar Alexander. I'm proud brother of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. My current position is I'm actually a school administrator for the school district of Philadelphia. I've been with them for 5 years. So currently in my role, my job is to teach behavior in my school, as well as impact our children to be successful. So again, I'm excited to be here with everyone tonight.
So Lamar, I'm going to ask you the same question. What made you want to get into your profession?
That is a great question. I actually have my bachelor's in sports management. So being a licensed social worker, this was not actually my goal. But as I became a big mentor for the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and really just seeing the impact on our children and how much they need that support from there. And I have my own traumatic experiences from being in my youth. As a result, I wanted to do something different that I can really create and change the community that we live in. So I decided to get into working with kids and been doing it ever since.
All right. The next brother I want to introduce to the platform is Charles Robinson Smead.
Hey, how's it going, brother man?
How's it going? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Charles Robinson Sneed. I'm a licensed professional mental health counselor. I currently work as a clinical mental health coordinator in Salem City School District in New Jersey. And so I've been working there for this past academic school year. But outside of that, I also have a brand called Color My Mind, which pretty much focuses on pretty much breaking the stigma around mental health in underserved communities by doing that through creative initiatives that really take mental health outside of the box of an office and bring it into the community for more comfortable spaces.
That's good. And the last brother I want to introduce is Dr. William White.
Good afternoon, everybody. Definitely glad to be here. So just a little bit about me. I currently work for the Department of Defense as a director of psychological health. My main goal in this job is to keep our military members fit to fight. So that means mentally fit to fight. I have a small part-time private practice where I see folks individually, and I also am a field trainer or educator for a couple of schools of social work. And so I have my BSW, MSW, LMSW, and LCSW, and a doctorate in theology. So I've been doing this for a while, number of jobs, including working for the Department of Children and Family Services as a probation officer for Charter Magellan Behavioral Health, and basically returning to work for the military. I'm an Air Force veteran.
All right. Now, a question I had for you is, what's the reason that made you get into your profession?
A number of things brought me to my profession. My family has always been in the provided some type of service. From my father, the late Reverend Dr. William C. White Sr., who was a pastor, to wanting to contribute to the community even while I served in the military. So working for the Department of Defense right now is full circle for me as I seek to help those and provide services to those probably who would not ordinarily speak to a mental health professional.
Now, I know I asked most all the brothers this question, but I did get a chance to ask one brother this question, so I want to give him an equal opportunity. Charles, what was the main reason on why you wanted to do this work? Wait, unmute.
Sorry about that. But yeah, not to be completely honest with you, Johnny, I grew up I guess I was seen as like a difficult kid. I was not like the most well-behaved, but I made a lot of like not so good choices. And throughout the course of my life, I feel like I needed a lot of help. So as I got older, I really didn't know what I wanted to be or, what I wanted to become. But I eventually just kind of took my natural instinct of getting involved in psychology as far as my major in college, just because I'm naturally a thinker. But through that major, I learned about counseling and I learned about mental health. And I ultimately learned about something that I felt like I could have benefited from when I was a kid. And that's really what motivated me to get into the field, was try to be for other children, or try to be for other people what I felt like I needed when I was younger.
All right, thank you for providing that analysis. Now, I want to bring the whole panel all together so we can go into these conversations. So, the first question I have for all of you, as a professional in your experiences, how do you define mental health? I'm gonna start with Lamar.
That's a great question. I define mental health as a person who has different struggles, whether it's spiritual or mentally. And through that mental health, it can impact you in a number of different ways, from physical to your appetite, so on and so forth. So I define mental health as simply just being something that a lot of people deal with, but there's different levels of it as well.
Okay, Dr. White.
Mental health is our mental wealth. It describes our emotional, psychological, and our social well being. Mental health affects how we think, how we interact, how we interpret our environment. Mental health begins from the time we're born, through adolescence, through young adulthood, to senior adulthood. It covers our lifespan.
All right, Charlie.
I'm going to concur with both of the panelists. It's basically understanding of our mental, social, psychological well-being, and more importantly, how we see those things, how life has shaped us individually to be able to handle those components, and how we respond to them. And that pretty much encompasses just how mental health operates.
All right, Charles.
I can't hear Johnny. I'm sorry.
All right, so Charles, same question for you.
I don't think he can hear us.
All right, let me see. Charles, can
And
you
I can
hear?
hear everybody, but I can't hear Johnny.
So he was asking for you to define mental health.
Okay, got it. So, mental health to me, I definitely concur with the panelists as well. But for me, mental health is for me, it's as simple as the health status of your mind. And like Dr. White has said, it's basically, the part of you that impacts your emotional, psychological, social well-being. But it is something that every person has, right? That's the reason why I believe the stigma around it has to be broken, because it is a part of each and every single person. Every human being has mental health. There's no other way you can get around it. It is just as equal as your physical health. So it's just a part of who we are.
All right. There was a question that was brought up as to how would you describe mental health? So I'm gonna start with Charlie.
I would describe it as basically the operation or the behaviors that we have pertaining to just how life has shaped us to see, to see things. Just starting at an early age, we're trained to be able to act, to think, to behave in certain ways, and oftentimes through that shape of life, we just begin to implement those things that we've learned, and that pretty much wraps what we would say or what we would see as mental health.
All right, Lamar, same question for you.
I would describe mental health as just really being a problem that a lot of people have, like that was already brought up by Brother Charles. It could be a thing that a lot of people struggle with, especially minorities. And that, like it was already said, is our mental wellness. And I think this is a big topic, especially with us being in COVID and the pandemic. And it's important for us to really take that time to spend dealing with our mental health and realizing that, hey, Sometimes we have issues. Sometimes we have those stresses and anxiety that impact, our everyday walk in society. So I think it's important that we focus on that. So that's how I would describe mental health.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the next question. What stigma do you see in Black men that do not want to focus on their mental health? So I'm going to start that off with Dr. White.
There are a number of factors. One, I think, material and social factors. For as your social economic status, the number of providers that are available that are of the BIPOC community, the lack of access to affordable care, and the stigma that society places around seeking health care. Often we will emphasize some of the negative coping skills and actually adopt those things or negative coping mechanisms, and we'll actually adopt those into our culture and celebrate around some of the most negative things, whereas we actually could talk to somebody and participate in what we call talk therapy and actually alleviate and deal with some of the stress and often depression and anxiety that we're dealing with.
Charlie?
One of the biggest stigmas that I typically see is just the notion that we have to be strong. When we're on the football field, you get hit, coach tell you get up, shake it off, be strong and move on. And oftentimes that strength, which is a great attribute for men, can also be the demise as well, especially when we have to put that strength to the side to be able to address some pain that might be happening internally. And then we have to do what a lot of research tell us in life in order to be able to get through difficult times, and that is to be able to communicate. And oftentimes not having that understanding of the importance of expressing vulnerabilities because of the need that we have to be strong often becomes that burden that keeps a lot of men in dark places.
All right. Charles?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few stigmas that work toward or work against men, rather Black men, when it comes to our mental health. One of the main struggles that I see for Black men when it comes to mental health is our identity. We struggle in that area quite a bit. It almost seems like we have an identity crisis that prohibits us from being able to really talk about what we're experiencing, talk about our traumas, talk about our experiences, because a lot of times we become too almost controlled by how society views us and how society has viewed us. What is determined as being strong or weak. We allow society and communities to define what that looks like for us. And so a lot of times I can see that as a huge stigma factor that works toward, or works against rather, Black men seeking mental health counseling or getting involved in conversations that cause us to have to address our feelings or different things that we might have experienced throughout the course of our lives.
All right, Lamar?
I would have to say for me, the biggest stigma is for Black men is that we're crazy, right? Anytime you have any issues, you looked at like something wrong with him, prescribe all these medications, so on and so forth. So I think just really getting Black men to understand that all of us have issues, regardless if it's mental health or, marriage issue. There's always going to be a problem in your life, but just realizing that when you're going to counseling, therapy, so on and so forth, the whole goal is to figure out how to understand first what your problem is, and then be able to get those skill sets to be able to maintain if those issues happen again. So just get really people to understand that stigma of you're crazy, that's not a real thing. That's just somebody realizing, hey, I really have an issue that I need to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, there was a question that was dropped in the comments. And the question is, do you feel that Black men are always looked at to be strong? So I'm gonna start with Charles.
I'm gonna say we are looked at to be strong by a skewed definition, a very um, complex, false definition of strength. A lot of times, strength in the community of men is seen by dominance, it's seen by control, it's seen by emotionlessness, right? It's seen by a certain physical stature, it's seen by a certain tax bracket or financial gain. So a lot of times, the strength of men, and more particularly Black men, the definition of strength for us comes from a very traumatic source, and a lot of that strength was put on Black men, honestly, through the slave trade and what we were made to endure, not just as Black men, but in front of our families, in front of our wives, in front of our children, in order to be able to survive and to continue making a living. So the definition of strength for us has been skewed for a long time, and I think that it continues to show up in our society today, just in different ways, but also from the same source. So yeah, we are definitely looked at to be strong, but I think the definition of strength that we are looked at to match up to is not healthy.
Hmm. So now we're gonna go into the next question. Does race really factor in the level of our care? So I'm gonna start off with Lamar.
Absolutely. If we look at the healthcare system, almost every system that we have in our society, Black men or minorities, period, are treated a different way. We don't have the same expectations, so on and so forth. And for me personally, working in a school system, majority of our students, I'm in a school in North Philadelphia, which is a rough part of the city of Philadelphia, and you can see that a lot of our brown and Hispanic children have high diagnosis of special education in regards to emotional support, ADD, ODD, just all those different diagnoses. So clearly, our care, anytime we have any issues, especially our children, they look at that. They have to give them some type of diagnosis or some way to describe certain behaviors. Versus if you look at some of the other children who are non-colored, they may not get those diagnoses. They may, do other things to implement interventions to make sure they're successful. So clearly, there's a disproportionality in regards to the way our brown colored children and adults are taken care of versus well as our counterparts.
Mhm. Charlie.
And I'll pretty much just concur with everything that Lamar mentioned. And I will say that in our field, we are trying to do the best that we can to address diversity issues when it comes to the modalities that we use, the interventions that we use. We are trying to educate, mental health professionals on the importance of being able to build relationships with diverse groups and being able to be versatile when it comes to being able to provide a level of care. Unfortunately, because we have not really made it to a point to grab hold of that issue. We have a lot of people that seek to find someone that looks like them, and we don't have as many people in our field that look like us, which does become a challenge for the level of care. And oftentimes, a lot of Black men will say, I'm not going to anyone else that does not look like me. And when there's only a handful of us that are Black men, it definitely puts Black men seeking mental health services at a disadvantage when it comes to level of care.
All right. Charles.
Honestly, I think Charlie and Lamar hit the nail on the head. It's I was speaking to um, an older woman in my life who is like a role model to me, kind of like a mom to me. And she was actually a psychologist, and she was talking to me about, when I first got in the field and I got my license and everything, that's what she was congratulating me. But I almost couldn't understand the magnitude of why she was congratulating me. and she was explaining to me that Black men, especially licensed Black men in like our field, are seen as unicorns. Like we're not common. And there are so many Black men out there. Yes, we have a lot that might not be interested in mental health or the conversation about mental health right now, but there are a lot who are starting to get privy to the conversation, and they would like to talk to somebody that they identify with, somebody that they can come into the room and have like experiences with, like Charlie was just saying. But the level of care, like Charlie was just talking about, it's kind of hard because there's not a lot of us, just not a lot of us in the field, and so that does decrease the percentage of Black men who are actually getting into therapy, because they don't have too many who look like us, especially if you're talking about a population like I live in Delaware. In Delaware, we probably have 5 licensed mental health counselors that are men, and I'm one of the 5. It's just like, so it's far and few.
All right. So there was a question that was brought up in the chat as it relates to, even though we just talked about race, now, and anytime that we talk about race, we always got to talk about finances. So this question, I'm going to give it to Dr. White. What roles does wealth and status play in mental health?
Well, actually, that's linked to the previous question, because one has to, especially given the time of what we're dealing with now, we can't deny the historical racial disparities in mental health. And so when you have those type of disparities, that means that naturally we are less likely to have access to mental health care or mental health services. One of the things that folks often forget, it costs to see a mental health provider. It costs to get medical treatment, just like anything else. That means when it's cost and there's a price to it, sometimes folks are less likely to seek services. So they may share with someone who's really not been trained in CBT or any of the other treatment modalities, whereas if you got some professional counseling that may make a difference in how you move forward in the situation. And unfortunately, when we start talking about wealth, if you can't afford it, well, then that results in you receiving inadequate and sometimes poor care. One of the things that I do with my interns, I always encourage them as soon as possible to get licensed. And in fact, I had worked with Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work, and each student that I had went on to get licensed. And so, again, the more credentials you have, the more services you can provide. It is a very competitive market, but at the same time, as somebody alluded to earlier, it may be a while before you get to talk with a clinician from the BIPOC community. Majority of men that I speak to are really excited to get a chance to share how they feel as a man and not be judged. So one of the things I always tell folks when they talk to me, welcome to the no judgment zone, because that's not my role to judge you. But often, again, to talk to somebody, it costs. And so our services sometimes can be cost prohibitive.
All right. Now, there's another question that came in the chat, and I'm going to give this to Charlie. Why is it so hard for Black men to talk to one another instead of at one another?
Talking to one another, talking at one another is less vulnerable. Hey, what's up, man? Yeah, you watched the game last night? Man, hey, that jump was off the chain. And we just keep it moving. Talking with one another is being able to say, hey, I seen that post you put on Facebook. It looked like you're going through a tough time. I just want to let you know that even though me and sitting down talking about emotions and feelings is not the norm. I'm here for you if you ever need somebody to talk to. And then for that person to say, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm in a dark place.
Yeah.
We don't have that type of training. We don't have that type of understanding to go to dark places. Instead, it's a, you will be all right, toughen through it. I'll see you. I'll see you at work tomorrow. And we just do a lot of talking at one another. A lot of the training that I work with is being able to help men to be able to talk with people, to be able to open up and talk to their spouses, helping military men to be able to go to places that is very shameful, that's very hurtful, and be able to say, hey, this is why I shut down. Because what I'm feeling inside is so intense for me that I don't know what else to do but shut it down. It's not that I don't love you, that I don't care, but I just don't know what else to do with this stuff that's happening internally. And so we're just trained to talk at people. And that's why we're in the profession that we're in. That's why it's an expense, because um, to be able to learn those types of skills, unfortunately, it requires trained people to teach those things, which goes back to the previous question. And it's a bad thing to have to explain to people that, hey, my fees are right here, and to hear them say I can't afford that. Um, it feels bad as a clinician, but I just know that 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 I had one woman tell me I should be ashamed of myself for what I charge, but it was just like there's so much need out there that I have to be able to. I have to make a living as well, especially with the education, the amount of money that I put into my skills to be able to help other people. But um, that's a great question. Whoever posted it on Facebook, we do have to learn how to talk with each other as men instead of always talking at each other.
I agree. And before I go on to the next question, I do want to acknowledge two brothers. The first brother is our 21st International Grand Polaris, Brother Robert Clark Jr., and our
Wow.
23rd International Grand Polaris, Brother Sean D. Housen. Thank you, brothers, for
Wow.
joining to this platform and continuing on with this conversation. Now, there's another question that was brought up in the comments, and I'm going to give this question to Lamar. Why is it that Black men can't accept constructive criticism? Why do we see to talk to yes men?
That is a great question. That's something that we talk about all the time, especially being in the education field, because there's not many Black males at all. And for the ones that are there, when I'm trying to mentor other young brothers coming in, they have a hard time with accepting criticism. I think the biggest part of the problem is, especially for our community, let's be real, we're missing a lot of fathers. I know me myself, I did not grow up with my father at all. And as a result, I dealt with a lot of anger issues, a lot of frustrations. I got into a lot of fights. And I definitely want to give kudos to the fraternity, because as I joined college, I'm not going to lie, I still was dealing with some of those things. But as I went through the process of becoming a brother and really getting to know some of the brothers, it helped me to really work on my communication, learn to not only learn from people who are older than me, but also my age, and realize that I don't always have an answer for that. So I think the biggest piece and the issue is we lack the strong fathers, because it's one thing to make a child, but then it's one thing to actually be there and teaching them. And me being a father right now to my son has been one of the best things I've ever done. Just because I'm able to raise up another Black man to do the right thing, stay out of the streets, and show him that there's another way to be successful. So fatherhood is the thing that's lacking.
All right. So now we're going to go on to the next question. And I'm going to give this question to Charles. So, regarding the pandemic, how has this crisis affected the mental state of Black men?
Oh man, that's a complex question, but that's a loaded question too. So, how has the pandemic impacted the mental health of Black men? Um, I would say it has probably made things on some sides harder for Black men because, and I'll say it like this: we already don't know how to grieve. We already don't know how to handle hard emotional experiences. And so, and I can only speak about the Black men that I have in my life and the ones that I'm close to, that I've been able to be close enough and have the privilege of being close enough to have experiences throughout the pandemic. And what I will say from the Black men that are close to me who have lost numbers and numerous of people throughout the pandemic, it became harder for them because they already didn't have an understanding of how to grieve, or never really taken through a grieving process in a healthy space, was never really taught how to healthily process their emotions or even talk about what that even looks like. So to already be at a deficit or already be at a loss for being able to effectively communicate or talk about what it is that you're feeling, and on top of that lose 5 and 10 family members, it's a lot. It's a lot. I think that it has impacted Black people and Black men more specifically in more negative ways than positive. However, I will say that a positive that I've seen is that there are more conversations happening via social media for Black men to have conversations about what they're experiencing, that is normalizing the conversation, whether it's via Instagram Live, Facebook Live, or platforms like we're on tonight. I've been seeing that as a benefit to the pandemic because we've been kind of forced to go into more virtual platforms, which does maximize our reach to the amount of people that we can, connect with and whatnot and be a help to. So I've seen some detriments to it, but I've also seen some benefits as well, particularly for Black men.
All right. Now, this question, I'm going to give this to Dr. White. So Richard Gilbert asks, so many don't have access to insurance. What is the best way to get assistance for someone who would benefit from mental health help?
So without mental health insurance, there's always the option of self-pay. There's also always the option of a counselor that provides services on a sliding scale. Then, depending on what you do, like your company may have an EAP program where you can get 3 visits, at no cost. If you are a military member, there's a military crisis line, and there's also, for example, for those who for anybody, the suicide prevention line, and so there are resources, but often we really struggle in making that initiative, especially men. One of the biggest things with us is that many of us will often say, well, there's nothing wrong with me. And so what I explain to people when we start talking about therapy, I go to the gym to work on my triceps, right? There's nothing wrong with my arm. I'm going to work that muscle. So that's how I equate it to mental health. It's okay to sit down and have a conversation, and it's okay if something is wrong. So we're looking for solutions versus staying stuck. But again, I would encourage somebody who's struggling with that financial piece, talk to someone who knows about different resources. And even if the counselor, says, hey, I take this particular insurance, you can ask, well, is there, again, a sliding scale? Or I know with many clinicians who are social workers, they will often provide a certain number of visits, at no cost or prorated. Then there's also organization where, again, if you're military, you can get some services at no cost. But I really say you have to really dig around for those services. And again, there are a number of crisis lines. Each state, at least we do here in Georgia, have a mental health division where you can call and get services. Again, here we go again talking about those disparities. And so we often see that again in our community. And if you can't afford care, then therein again, it impacts your access. But then again, another avenue is if you see opportunities for group therapy. You can participate in group therapy at a reduced cost compared to individual therapy. And so I encourage folks to look at those additional avenues. And if you really are seeking help, there are folks who will reach out to you and try to provide some services for you.
All right. Now, the next question was brought up by our 23rd International Grand Polaris, Sean Housen. And this question is going to Lamar. Mental health for Black men is still taboo. How do we make it cool or all right to talk to a professional and not your pastor?
That is a great question. And I believe it's real simple. It starts with this conversation tonight. When we were asked to do this and just throughout our planning, we all talked about our ultimate goal tonight was to make an impact and share with people not only our experiences, but us as being professionals in mental health. So I think it really starts with this conversation. And I think if more Black men would be more transparent to say, look, I got issues and we can all really talk about this, I really think we can make it more cool. But I think definitely what we're doing and us being in our prospective field will really help. And I think also too, being African American, I think in our communities, we can promote it a little bit better as well. What I mean is that, let's be real, us being in our profession, we have all these professional terms and a lot of minorities don't understand half the stuff we're talking about. So I think really being in our communities and teaching people to understand what some of these things actually mean, and that is not necessarily a bad thing, that's just the name of it, will help people to really want to maybe come more to mental health and get that help that they need. But that was a great question.
All right. So I'm going to give this next question to Charlie. In your practice, what was a challenge that you were faced with when serving our own?
It continues to go back to that communication piece. And instead of being able to communicate with other people, we communicate at people. And it's so much safer, it's so much cooler and less vulnerable to just talk about what's on the surface. And it's a lot more vulnerable going below the surface to the core of our pain, our rejections, our worries, our shame. And because we don't want to go to those places, we just try to cover them up with our strength. We try to cover them up with activities, distracting ourselves. And that was the number one component for me in my practice. When our distractions were taken away, it forced us to have to deal with, it forced us to sit in uncomfortable places. And when you're at home because you can't go to work, when you're at home because you can't go to the bar or go kick it with your boys, and you have to be at home and sit in some stuff that you really don't know anything about, and you start feeling uncomfortable, you start feeling stuff that you don't like, and you can't turn and talk to your spouse about it because you don't know, you don't have that experience. Now you're sitting in dark places trying to figure out, what do I do with this uncomfortable, depressive like symptoms, anxiousness? What do I do with all these uncomfortable feelings that are happening internally for me? And what I've noticed is that one of the biggest challenges is for men to come into the office and turn to people that they really love and let them see parts of them that no one has ever seen before. And that requires a huge sense of vulnerability, which men are not really trained and taught to do. A matter of fact, it is not a survival characteristic for men to be vulnerable. You go all the way back to your hunter and gatherer days where we had to be the strong ones to be able to keep food on the table And then just like Charles was saying, it's passed down to the slavery years where we still had to be strong, to now we're in the 21st century still trying to carry that strength. And it's a big challenge to be able to put that strength to the side, to be able to show people parts of you that are not so cool.
All right. So the next question is going to be related to an actual Instagram post. And first off, I want to shout out brother Joshua Johnson, who is part of our time committee that actually brought up this Instagram post. So according to an Instagram post from Fight Through Mental Health, they posted the following statistics. 84 men a week take their own life. 75% of all suicides are from males. Men are less likely to get help. So, Lamar, what are some risk factors that can cause men to take their own life?
I mean, to be honest, for real, I would really say just being a black man. I mean, the standard that we have to live by, just me personally in my work experience, like, we're looked at totally different. Like, we have to get everything right. We can't wear hoodies. We can't walk in the street. We stop by the police. We even, as black men, we even look at each other. Like, let's be real. If I'm walking down the street and I see 3 young brothers behind me, natural reaction is I'm going to look back to see what they're doing. So just us being who we are and ourselves is already a factor. But I think also too, just a lot of the traumas that we've experienced. I can't speak for everybody, but I know a good amount of minorities who have experienced gun violence, maybe have witnessed some type of traumatic experience, sexual abuse, so on and so forth. So having all those different experiences of abuse has really impacted us mentally. And as a result, not dealing with it from a child, if it happened at 5, now you're 35, all those piles and piles of as somebody brought up in the chat, layers that are constantly stacked on, now it's just like a volcano. It's ready to explode. And as a result, when you get to that point where, and I've been at that point too, where it's just like, there's so much weight on me. I don't know what else to do. And as a result, there's nobody checking on that person. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think about that too. Like, dang, what if I would have had just called this person? Because I've lost a few friends to suicide. And, let's be real. You don't know what anybody's thinking unless you ask them. Sometimes you may not be able to reach out to somebody, but you just never know that impact you can have from just simply saying, hey, how you doing, brother? Hey, how you doing? So on and so forth. Just having that conversation. So that's my thoughts on the risk factors.
Okay. Dr. White, with the percentage that they said on that post that 75% of all suicides are for males, do you believe this percentage or do you think it may be more?
I'd say it's probably a little bit higher. And again, I'd say this is also generational. As we, as a population, have assimilated more into mainstream society, you are seeing suicide, for example, now be an option where maybe past generation, it wasn't as pronounced as it is now. So one of the things, and we talk about what leads to suicide, untreated mental health diagnosis. Often we have friends and colleagues that display with symptoms of depression, and we'll often say, what's wrong with them? But at the same time, culturally, and of course, being in a fraternity, we may glorify alcohol. And so we have events and activities structured around alcohol. And so we know that overconsumption of alcohol, right? Alcohol is a depressant, right? So when folks start drinking, and then, for example, some folks will put it online, then they'll start going on a rant, and you can tell by looking at some folks' posts, they're depressed. But at the same time, certain communities, we tend to glorify abusing ourselves. Of course, it's during a certain stage in life, because as we get older, right, that idea of drinking what we used to drink as an undergrad is not what we can drink and function as we get older with a family, job, and etc. Right? So some of us, will often have an event, and we'll have a get together, and some of us we'll go back to our old undergrad drinking ways, right? And what's that about? And often, you have an older individual trying to fit in. We call that wanting to be young again. And again, we know even in school now, alcoholism, again, a diagnosis, isolation. We tend to be loners and want to handle things ourselves. So all of these things can contribute to, as Brother Simpson said, going to a very dark place. And without help and without some type of treatment, sometimes we sit in that dark place way too long.
Thank you for that. All right. There was a question that was brought up by Michael Thomas, and I'm going to give this question to Charles. How do we communicate this conversation to our youth?
You said, how do we communicate this conversation to our youth?
Yep. Just communication in general as in regards to mental health.
To be honest with you, I think we communicate it to our youth by investing in relationship with them. I think that's really the best way to incorporate conversations about mental health to our youth, is starting to build relationships with them, because that's really where it starts. Issues that we have when it comes to our mental health, a lot of times it comes from the types of relationships that we've had growing up from childhood. And so if we build healthy relationships with our youth, if we're asking them, I use my nephew for examples all the time, because he's the only young person that I know of right now that I've been in his life for his entire life. And so he's 14 years old, and I have conversations with my nephew every single day. I ask him how he's doing, and when he gives me I'm doing fine, no, I'm really asking, how are you doing? It's beyond fine. I want to know what's going on in your mind. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What happened today at school? What happened after you got out of school? What happened? How are you feeling since you lost your football game? Having those serious conversations with them, and really investing in that relationship. We have to, I think a lot of times as adults, it's important for us to get comfortable enough to get out of the seat as an authoritarian and kind of meet a younger person on their level, to have that type of a conversation to where they're not intimidated. So I think that if we can really take our pride and put it to the side and come to the level of a younger person, so that way they're not intimidated, they're a little bit more open to have conversations. And really for us as Black men, we have to learn our own tone too, because our tone and our presence can intimidate a younger person to not want to express themselves to us. And so we check ourselves on our tone and our presence, knowing that your masculinity, your manhood does not mean that you have to be loud, boisterous, and overbearing, that you can still be meek, mild, soft, and caring, but still be comfortable enough in your manhood to have that type of relationship or connection with the younger brother. I think that will help the relationships that we have with young men, and therefore be able to benefit their mental health. And I'm hoping that makes sense. But I think that the vessel for us to build the conversation, or really present the conversation to younger people, to get them invested in the conversation in their mental health, is through building relationships, healthy relationships.
Okay. And there was a question that was brought up in the comment as well, and I'm gonna give this to Charlie. What's the difference between counseling and therapy?
Counseling typically addresses more coping skills. Hey, in order to be able to address this dark place, in order to be able to address this depression, this anxiety, let's implement breathing techniques, meditation. Let's implement some cognitive ways that you can try to look at these things a little bit differently, so that you don't have to sit in that dark place. Therapy goes to that dark place. I'm going to go into that dark place with you, this place that you don't like, other people don't like, and I'm going to sit in this place with you and help you bring understanding to this place. We're frat brothers, friends, family. Support is great to be able to keep people out of those dark places. but the healing comes in the dark place. And you have to have someone trained to be able to go into those dark places, because if you go in that dark place and you don't have the experience to navigate in that place with that individual, it could cause more trauma. And that's the biggest difference between counseling and therapy.
All right. So I'm gonna take one more question from the comments, and that question is from Brother Rich Gilbert. And I'm gonna give this question to Lamar. If you could influence the D9 targeting the fraternities, how can they help the narrative for Black men to get mental health?
That is a great question. Well, we know that, and let's be all the way transparent, because the other fraternities are older, they have a larger member population just by natural, the way of the years. But I would say this: if all of us were to come together, all the other fraternities, including us, I think we could really be impactful. I think a part of the problem is, and I'm going to be very transparent. We get caught up in this. I'm a this, I'm a that. I'm in this fraternity, that fraternity, and we become clashing towards each other. Whatever you decided to do, to be honest with you, I could care less. That's your opinion or whatever you decide to do. But ultimately, we are all African American men. That's what it comes down to. And I think if we all came together truly and not get caught up in our colors and what yard we pledged on and all this other stuff, and really get to the root and just say we all stood together, people would actually take us seriously. So I think if we all really came together and started doing more events, we started seeing all of the divine non-fraternities together in a positive setting, and not, there's drama, there's drinking, but hey, here you are, a group of Black men, despite fraternities or whatever the situation is, they're coming together to do something positive in the community. So I think if all of us came together, and obviously, and this is not like a shot or anything, but this starts with when they see our leadership come together, and they see other members in our local chapters come together, then everybody will start to see, hey, we need to come together and start doing more things to be active. And as we're doing tonight, as brothers of Iota Phi Theta, we're all from different chapters, well, at least most of us, except for me and Charles. But as us coming together, we're starting the standard. So if everybody else can come together and do this, and we reach out to because let's be real, we all know different members of other fraternities, and we say, hey, come on, bro, I need you to do this or do that, we can really make a change. But we have to come correct, and we have to be serious. We can't come and just think that we're going to stroll and talk about mental health. You have to come serious and really give people that opportunity to really have a real conversation and give them the solutions and skill sets they need to be successful.
All right. So I'm going to give one more question that someone wanted to ask, and then we're going to close this out. So this is a question for all the panelists. Why does every white man that kills someone have a mental illness, and every Black person that does something is considered a thug? So who wants to take a stab at that question first?
I think we all have to look at, confirmation bias, okay? And who's telling the news? So mental health, it is what it is. But we have to be careful not to get caught up into the media's depiction of what mental health is, especially in our community. Some people will say mental health is a scapegoat, period. But again, I just think that the news media is always going to portray it a certain way. And to me, we have to tell our own stories. We have to tell our own news. We know the difference between mental health and a career criminal. But with that being said, we've been portrayed as career criminals for a very long time. And when we start talking about these caricatures or characters that we're supposed to fit into, the reality is most men don't. So we just have to watch these stereotypes and narratives that are painted about us. And, the way we combat it is, having conversations like we're having right now. And to the last question, I want to say, I do actually refer clients to other men in the community that are members of the other D9 organization. And I will say that the clinicians that I work with, they're just as professional and provide high quality service to those seeking mental health treatment. So I just think it's a matter of the organizations making those connections to, and again, as Brother Lamar said, when they see it happening at the top, even with time, we can, perhaps our next conference, we invite a different member from each other fraternity and, have that conversation. I know a few right now that would be glad to engage in this conversation with us. And I think it's it's about the community. And it's about us coming together to address this collectively.
All right, Charlie.
Yeah, somebody in the chat, summed up that black-white thing, that institutionalized racism. We've always kind of been viewed as that angry black man, that bitter, angry black woman, and it just seems like that same um, connotation has just always followed us. And as much positivity that we have in our community, we still just, when that one little thing happened, we're just a thug. And when our counterparts go through the same identical issues, it's just a mental illness that that person has to deal with. Let's get them into a hospital, give them treatment, and let's give them 1 year of jail time when we get 20. It's a huge institutionalized concept that has to be addressed. I do want to say this. I feel that we are doing a much better job breaking those stigmas. I think that mental health is becoming very normalized for younger people. They're starting to look on TV and see people that look like us talk more about mental health. One of the biggest components that I was able to witness and how it impact clients coming in to see me as a marriage counselor was when Obama's came out and said we went to therapy. And when we continue to just put people that are way up there, and we continue to encourage them to come out and share their stories and their experiences, and that to normalize mental health, I believe that we'll continue to break this stigma in our community and be able to really move how we see mental health. Unfortunately, we got this bigger institution that still continues to send their own agenda and their own message to just try to keep us boxed in. And it's just up to us as a community to say we're not going to accept that. We are going to take the steps that we need in our community to have stronger and more healthier mental health.
Lamar.
As I was listening to everybody talking, it was really making me think about our responsibility as African American men in our community. With the news and everything, let's be real. Like it's already been said, the systematic racism, we got that. But let's also take some responsibility on our own selves in our own community. And what do I mean? Let's be real. We have a lot of rap music where we glorify drugs, prostitution, shooting, so on and so forth, right? And we glorify that. But I think if we did a better job in our communities, and here's the thing, everybody has the right to listen to their own music, but let's be real, music has an influence, whether you agree or not. The truth of the matter is it does have an influence. And everybody who went to college can tell you that. So with that being said, we have to have a greater responsibility in teaching in our community. And it starts with us as adults first, because we blame a lot of things on the kids, but where do the kids get it from? They watch us. So we don't set the standard, the kids are going to do the same exact thing. And that's what's happening in the Black community, because I've been to some of these third world countries, so on and so forth. And when you go to some of these places and you see they are living in poverty even worse than America, but they don't have half the crime that we do. And that really blew my mind. And it's not because it has not necessarily, anything to do with money, but it's all about what are you teaching in your community. So I think that's the biggest thing we need to have is more structure, more uplifting, and we need to be there as parents for our children.
All right, and Charles.
Yeah, man. I don't have as a profound way of explaining this as the other panelists, which I think did an amazing job at answering the question. But just if I could add to the commentary, I would say a lot of what we see in media has to do with a narrative, a pushed narrative that has been there for centuries beyond. Uh, we have been uh, there has been a narrative created for us prior to any of us even being born. And so I was telling some of the young men that I work with who sometimes can't fathom why they get certain type of treatment in communities. And they were asking, you know what I mean? Like, well, I know I'm not that type of person. I know I don't do those certain types of things. And I tell them, I said, I know that because I know you, and you know that because you know yourself. But to somebody on the other side, all they see is a skin color. And so there's a narrative that has been established well before us even being born. That is it. Exactly why it's important for us to do exactly what the other panelists said, which is creating a new narrative by living our lives out loud and what we do in our profession and how we show up in our communities and how we do service in our communities and the types of relationships and the mentorships and how we become role models for the young Black men who are coming after us, so that way they have a different type of a person to look up to, whether that's just to have a conversation or even teaching them how to healthily work through their traumas. That's a whole conversation. And so I think it's all about us building a new narrative to kind of debunk the narrative that was pushed on us in order for us to be able to see things change.
All right. So now what I'm going to do is ask each of you to give a closing remark, a closing message, and a takeaway from this whole experience. So, Charlie, what's your closing message?
Now, one of the questions that we did not get a chance to address is what can be a beginning step for men to do if they want to focus on their mental health. And what I want to really say is that we don't have to suffer in silence as Black men. If you look in the mirror and you say to yourself, I'm in a difficult place, I don't know what to do. And that's all you got to say. I don't know what to do. I can't fix this on my own. So I want to just encourage all the men, Black men, people out in the world, don't feel like you have to go through this alone. There are people out there that can help make sense of what's happening for you so that you can get out of the tough places that you're in.
All right. Lamar, what's your closing message?
I first would like to thank you guys for having me on. This was a very dope conversation. And thank you to all the panelists. I definitely learned a lot from you guys as well. But my closing remarks would simply be to everyone is that don't let anyone stop you from reaching your success. And that doesn't just mean, financially, business, whatever the situation is, but your mental health. You are important, and the first person that should be important to you is you. And you, if you are not successful, if you have a family, whatever it is that you have to take care of yourself. And that's something that I've really been striving for over these past couple of years is to make sure that I'm taken care of so that way I can take care of my family. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone and ask for help. Break that pride. It's better to get help from someone than for someone to, like we talked about with the statistics, be bearing you. So it's better to just put yourself out there, reach out to somebody, and that way they can, help you. So if you ever anybody needs help, I'm always open to it.
All right. Charles, what is your closing message?
Man, just like Charlie and Lamar said, my closing message is to take care of you. Like, you have to take care of you first. If your cup is not overflowing, be comfortable enough to tell people, hey, man, I don't have it today. There's nothing I can offer you today, because you have to invest in you and making sure that you have everything that you need in order to be able to be of service to other people. So my first thing I would say is definitely just take care of yourself. And then I would say, secondly, to understand as Black men that you actually become stronger when you learn to talk about and communicate your emotions effectively. We become weaker when we have this false ideology of what it means to be numb and emotionless. That doesn't make you strong. it actually make you weaker. So learn how to effectively communicate and express your emotions and your feelings makes you a stronger person. So that's my encouragement.
Right. And Dr. White, what is your closing message?
Well, I don't want to end with gratitude. I'm really thankful that the brotherhood and our community was able to join us and have this difficult conversation. Shout out to the moderator for keeping this going, Director Peoples, and our international Grand Polaris, Brother Housen, for making this possible. We really do need to have these conversations more frequently. There is a need in our community. To me, this conversation for some may be the path just to say, hey, I need to talk to somebody. And if anybody tonight is feeling down or feeling that they need to talk to somebody or is feeling suicidal, please reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Thank you all for this opportunity.
And again, I appreciate all the brothers that was on this panel this evening. I'm thankful for allowing to provide the knowledge, the tools, and the wisdom, not just within the brotherhood, but within the community and worldwide. I want to thank all the viewers that was able to view this on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on our national website. Now I'm going to close it out and give it to Brother Victor Peoples. You got to unmute.
My apologies. I want to first thank our 21st International Grand Polaris Robert Clark Jr. and Vice Polaris Richard Gilbert, and then also our current 23rd International Grand Polaris Sean Housen for attending this evening. More importantly, Johnny, great job. To all the panelists, I appreciate you, Dr. White, Charles, Charlie, Lamar. Thank you for your knowledge, your insight, but more importantly, thank you for keeping it 100 with the brotherhood. I'm going to quote, I think his name was Brother Timothy Cooper that was on here. And he stated, this is a great first step. I think, honestly, within IOTA, as the topic said, what's the narrative? Within IOTA, within this panel, within those that are seeking help or ready to start the conversation, I think we can continue this narrative. With that, on behalf of the Community Impact Team, I appreciate, again, thank you all, and thank you all for joining this evening.